This is Robert again. Now, this is part three of my series of videos that I've just started. We're talking about the news and Christian views and just trying to educate one another. I'm sorry, I'm looking around for different things. Let's begin with where we left off. I told you in the last video in part two that I was going to talk about ISIS. Okay. Now, you may notice some changes here on the wall, and I've moved some things around from part two. And I want to show you a couple of things. First of all, I'm not just talking about ISIS, I'm talking about Islam. Now, I want you to see up here in the top. Now, you see that map right there? That map is a map of the Ottoman Empire at its height. That was Islam as it had spread throughout the world. From Spain and Portugal over all the way to India and the borders of China, down through Africa. You can see right there, all the way up to the Russian Caucasus states and things like that. But let's just begin. There's no way that within a few minutes I can cover 1,400 years of history. So at the best, all I can do is try and give you a breakdown. Let's see. First part, I'm going to try and break down just where Islam comes from, what the Muslims do, what they believe, just the basics, okay? I'm not going to try and get into quoting all the Quran and all the verses from that, or the verses from the books of their traditions, Sharia law, and things like that. That's going to make it very difficult because I know you're going to have a lot of questions, and I'm really not going to have a lot of answers because I can't get into it. So let's just start with that, and then in the second part, maybe we can get into more of the particulars of historical, what took them to this point, where it was when the founding fathers built the nation, how it was applied, the laws of the land as far as Islam was concerned, and how things were looked at. And maybe in a third part, if we keep it nice and short, we might look at bringing it up to date and what's going on in the world today and what's going on in modern American history. First of all, let me tell you, I'm no expert on Islam. I rely on educating myself. I have watched a lot of movies, documentaries, interviews, listened to a lot of interviews on radio. I've listened to interviews from people who were former Muslims who converted to Christianity. I've listened to interviews from Muslims who are still devout Muslims defending their faith. I have read and studied a lot. Like, here's a book I just picked up not too long ago, and it is called The Legacy of Islam. You can see it is an Oxford book. It was printed in 1931. This is one of the things that I do. I like to get history books that are pre-1950. I think I've mentioned this before because they're less likely to be politically correct or to have the agendas that we often see today. And they're more likely to be straightforward in their answers and their information, less guarded, so to speak, because they're not politically correct. So there is a book, and I have several of these books, older books, older volumes dealing with Islam, travels in Eastern Europe, travels from people who have dealt with many different situations. I have the Quran. I have skimmed through the Quran. Again, I'm not trying to study to learn to practice Islamic faith. And there are many sources of information that I form my opinions from. Now, just to be clear, I'm not a welder, okay? And for me to sit here and tell you about welding would be embraced in my personal practical experience in life and very limited. I can tell you I have some general knowledge about welding because I have worked in different industries that was where welders worked at, although I never actually welded or studied welding or anything. I know you got to match alloys. I know there's certain temperatures that the metal has to be, that adjusting the machines to match the arc, which needs to generate the temperature. I know there's different types, MIG, TIG, stick welding. I know that there are when you weld something, it has to be examined and tested. They have a lot of non-destructive testing. and the types of things they do to look for cracks and fractures in the weld. I know that the weld, because it heats the metal, often requires that the metal be reheat treated to release the stress from the welding process. So there are some basic things I know about welding, but I could not begin to tell you what is involved in all the details about welding. I'm not a welder, okay? When it comes to Islam, it's the same thing. I know a lot about the peripherals, and I have studied it for 30 years, and I can tell you a lot about it. But really, I say go study from the history and go study by actually picking up a Quran and reading it. And this is what's been said since 9/11. If you want to learn about Islam, you have to pick up a Quran and study it. So there are a lot of good books out there. Some of the recent ones I just added to my collection not too long ago is this one called In the Shadow of the Sword. It's written by Tom Holland. He's an English historian, and in it it's called The Birth of Islam and the Rise of the Global Arab Empire. He has an hour-and-a-half long documentary by the same title on YouTube, and I have watched that as well. And basically, the conclusions that he comes with is he tries to study and find out where Islam had its birth, where Muhammad first showed up in history, where the Quran first showed up in history, and the whole thing with Islam. The conclusions do not match with, say, the oral history that I've gotten from Muslims. Well, there's a movie out called The Messenger or The Message. It stars Anthony Quinn. I think it was made in the 1970s, late 70s. And it was written, produced, directed, starred Muslims, and it's solely from a Muslim point of view about the story of Muhammad. So I'll share that as we proceed to talk about Islam and Muslims and where the faith come from. The latest book that I've got, and again, like I say, I try to get older books and studying the history of, but some books you just have to go out and get because there's very few people who will actually address what Islam is. Because there's so much political correctness out there that to find somebody who will actually address the issue and talk about what Islam is and what Muslims do and why they do it in Sharia law and things like that, it's good to find a reliable source. Now, this next book I find is on the New York Times bestsellers list. The gentleman who has done it has had many, many books on the New York Times bestsellers list. He is extremely thorough, has a research team working for him that double, quadruple checks every fact. He does thorough bibliographies to give all his notes and references about where he gets all this information. And he, even in this particular book, sent crews over to Saudi Arabia and to Afghanistan, Iraq, to talk to the mullahs and the imams and stuff and find out whether or not what was in the book actually represented the actual truth about Islam and about the Quran and about the teachings and customs and traditions of Islam. And brace yourself, some of you are not going to like this. It's by Glenn Beck. And just for those of you who say, oh no, Glenn Beck, you should understand Glenn Beck has a history of saying things and pointing things out that a couple years after he says them comes to be. Like he's talking about the caliphate, and right now the caliphate's coming into play. And we're talking about ISIS, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and stuff like that. Now look at this bottom map. This white area, this is lands that the ISIS says belongs to them. Now look at the similarity between these two maps. The similarity is striking. ISIS is saying that all the original land of the Ottoman Empire still belongs to Islam and they want it back. We'll discuss that in a minute. He knows that. He studied that. He studied the history that stole this land from the Ottoman Empire as far as it was promised to the Saudi Arabians and the Arab nations through treaties that were struck between a couple of guys named Picot and Sykes in 1916. You may have heard of Lawrence of Arabia and Sir Lawrence. And he got them to serve him and to help him. Again, that's got to do with history. We'll say that for another part. Anyways, Glenn Beck supplies so much knowledge, so much information. You have to, if you don't have this, you need to get this book, and you need to get multiple copies and pass it around to anybody who's actually interested in learning, because that's what's there. So there are several different books. Now, let's get into this. I'm already 10 minutes into the video, and I haven't even open the door on Islam. And that's what I mean. It will take multiple videos to break it down in digestible sizes and digestible chunks. My first introduction to Islam was in the mid 1980s when I ran into a group from the area. From the Nation of Islam. Now, this particular group, the Nation of Islam, you may remember, is led by Louis Farrakhan. He was involved with MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., and his movement. He was involved with Malcolm X, and he supported Malcolm X because Malcolm X was willing to take whatever militant behavior needed to happen to see a revolution in the civil rights movement in the United States. But the rumor has it that Nation of Islam kind of had to correct MLK or Malcolm X because they refused to toe the line for Islam, and so in the way that they wanted to go. And there's lots of different rumors out there over participation in the assassinations of and different things like that. So I'm not going to get into spreading rumors. I'm just going to tell you, when you look at the pictures of MLK at Washington Monument making his speech, and you see all the guys in the background dressed in white with the white box hats and stuff, that's Nation Islam. Today, we often see these gentlemen in these dress suits with the bow ties, Nation Islam. Primarily African-American gentlemen, and they are militant. Let's put it that way, militants. And so we see a lot of this in the world today. So let's break this down. First, we have to say, like I say, I'm not an expert, but I know enough to know that when you say that if you don't support Islam, that you're a racist, or you're against Islam, you're a racist, that it doesn't make any sense at all, because Islam or Muslims represent every race, every nationality. It doesn't matter what the Chinese, Indian, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, German, English, Canadian, American, whatever. It's a mixing every nation. So you cannot say racist. That cannot be applied, because that's generally applied to a particular person of a particular color or nationality. This applies to everything. Let's begin with the basics. I don't have enough time to really get into a lot of details, and I'll make another video to immediately follow this. Muhammad was a young man when he began to have visions and dreams, and he began to have fevers and wake up sweaty and chills and just all kinds of problems. And he knew, or he thought, he was demon possessed. And his mother, loving him as a mother loves a child, wanted him to not worry or think about such things. And so she told him, no, this is the angel Gabriel talking to you, giving you messages from Allah, or from their version of God. Now, understand that we talk about the Nation of Islam, or we talk about the Arabs, and we talk about the Persians and things like that, that in the Bible, it talks about Abraham, and Abraham had a son. His first son was by his maidservant to his wife Sarah, named Hagar. And the son was named Ishmael. And Ishmael was banished from the tribe of Abraham, and he left, and God announced or pronounced in the book of Genesis, talking about Abraham in this, how that he would always be at enmity with the world and with the people, descendants of Abraham. And his other son, which was the son of the promise, through Sarah, not through Hagar, but through Sarah, who was already well past childbearing years, so it was a child of miracles, since Abraham and Sarah were both beyond the years of bearing children, was named Isaac. And then his son became Jacob, okay? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the Israelites, the God of the 12 tribes, the God of the Jews, as we refer to them today, which is short for the tribes of Judah, the tribe of Judah, when they refer to as the Jews. When Judah was surviving of the 12 tribes used to exist, 10 were taken away by Assyria, 2 were left. That was the nation of Judah, and then they were referred to as Jews. Okay, the Jews have a different God. The principles, the ethics, the teachings, the customs, and traditions passed on by God in the Holy Scriptures, what we refer to as the Holy Bible, there's nothing similar at all with the teachings of Allah that are passed on to Muhammad. Now, let's get into this. So I believe that there are 2 separate gods. And one is not a god at all. One is a god. One is a false god. One's a true God. So I believe in the God of the Israelites. I believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I serve him. As a Christian, a follower of Jesus Christ, I believe the only way to heaven is through the name of Jesus Christ. And so let's continue. So Muhammad's having these visions and he's having these thoughts, and he's learning that you cannot worship other gods. He believes that there should be only one God, and this is what the visions are telling him. And in the village he lives in, there are many, many, many different gods being worshipped. In fact, there's a temple, and there's up to 400 different idols inside that temple from all the different gods. And there are ceremonies all the time, and things being conducted, and offerings being made to all these different gods. And he's standing up and he's speaking against them. And the religious leaders of all these different gods, as well as the community, the leaders in the tribes and the town, said, whoa, you cannot teach this, Muhammad. We don't want to hear it. We don't want to listen to it. You need to stop. And he refused to stop. Some of his best friends and some of his followers began to gather around him, and they wanted to lock him up and put him in prison. And eventually they run him out of town under the threat of killing him, and he escapes with a few of his supporters. And again, like I say, his mother, his uncle, who is a military man, I believe he was a general or something along those lines, had a lot of influence, a lot of power, a lot of prestige among the people. And so while he's out there in the wilderness, he's gathering more and more followers. Eventually, he gets enough followers to where he goes back into the town, and he raids the town and destroys all the idols, and he cleanses the temple, and he gets rid of all of those who want to worship these false idols. And a lot of them die in the process. This is a military attack on a town to overcome the town and seize the town. Okay? Over time, his belief and his customs, and as they grow, as he continues to have these visions and hear these words from Allah, he begins to build this religion, and this is where Muslims have their birth, in this town. And as the religion begins to spread, and it begins to go to other towns, and as that does, it's a threat to other towns, other security of other leaders, and they eventually raise up an army to go and defeat Muhammad. And so he calls a timeout and says, no, I want a treaty. We won't spread the word anymore. Peace, peace, peace. Let's stop. Let's take a step back. And so they let him stay kind of exiled out of the main group and out of their towns. But that, again, just like before, he's amassing an army. He's training. He's teaching. And so what ends up happening is when he gets to the point to where he can overcome that town, he breaks the treaty, goes in, raids the town, wipes out the army. And so all this time, the infusion of the military and militant behavior is put in with the teachings of Allah and with the teachings of Islam and what it is. And so this is his history from town to village to town. He just continues to spread and to grow. And so does Islam and the Muslim faith. And that's where it all begins, okay? And he gets a lot of followers and grows by leaps and bounds. And every town he goes in, there's the basic rule. Basically, you must, as Muslims understand, submit to Allah. That is the whole definition of the word of being a Muslim, is submitting to Allah, okay? And so that's what you have to do. And so they would go into a town, and your choice was either to submit and become a Muslim, or you became a slave and you had to pay a fee in order to continue to live in your home, walk your streets. It might have been generationally passed down. You had to pay a fee to exist. And if you weren't a Muslim, then everything you had become property of the Islamic people. And so that's how Islam began. And when Muhammad died, just like with Matthew, Luke, and John, Mark, Luke, and John, his followers began to write the Quran, gathering his teachings and everything that he passed on to them in one book, and that's your Quran. It's not in chronological order. There's no trying to understand it that way. And so you'll find a lot of stuff in there that's very militant, very aggressive, very much persecute the infidels. They must die. You must kill them. It's in there, okay? We're going to make another video, and we're going to go from here. So I appreciate your time. I hope I haven't bored you to death. And let's go in and look at the next thing.